Hey, so welcome to another episode of Is There More to Life Than Netflix? If you are new to us or you've forgotten why it is you're watching this, my name is Dave and this is my friend Andy. We are a pair of friendly and tame vicars who love nothing more than to talk about meaning of life, faith, and all of that kind of stuff. And we know that there are a lot of people out there right now with questions about these kind of things. So what we do is we invite you to add your questions and your comments as we have a good old chinwag about all that kind of stuff. So we talked about various different things over the last few weeks, and we've had someone send in a question for us today, which is all about, is it okay to talk about faith in public? And if it is okay to talk about my faith, what's the best way to do it? And does online help at all? So let me just be super professional and pop up our little episode banner. There we go. Is it okay to talk about faith? And we're going to be talking about doing that online, doing that with actual real people. Is it okay to do it? If it is okay to do it, how do you do it? And as always, we're here for people who are curious about this stuff, skeptical about this stuff, and absolutely everyone in between. But let us just introduce ourselves. So my name is Dave. I am a church leader at Storyhouse, which is a coffee shop and church. And we are currently having to close the coffee shop bit, but it will be reopening soon as we can do so safely. But in the meantime, we just moved all of our community and church stuff online, including doing this for fun. And this is my friend Andy. Andy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Dave. Did you say we're tame vicars? Was that the word you used?
I did say tame vicars. Is that an unfair descriction of us?
I don't know. I just was and interesting. So I'm Andy, and I'm not in Storyhouse. I'm a church leader in Derby, and going to be moving to a new church. In fact, I'm going to be licensed by the bishop next week, which is all very exciting electronically. And Dave and I have known each other since theological college, when you go in kind of normal and they train you and you come out as a vicar. So we're kind of used to doing these discussions, and we would probably be doing these anyway, even if they weren't filmed. So that's why we're filming them now.
It is. Yeah, it gives us an excuse to have a little chat. It's lovely to have some people along for the ride. We're going to start by talking about this thing. Is like, is it okay to talk about your faith? And let's just, out the gate, let's be honest. I think we're both people who would say, yeah, it is, and kind of go like a little bit further. We really like doing that, which is why we're doing this. Like before we, do some kind of fake pretend like we're not okay with this, we do actually quite like it. And I know I'm just going to share a bit of my story with it. So where it comes from me is like, I grew up going to church. I know that's not the case for a lot of people who are Christians, but I had that, and that was really great. As I looked around the church, the people I really looked up to, really admired and thought were really great were the ones who had the bravery to go out and tell people about Christianity, about their own faith. And I just thought they were, the people who had like the most bravery. They're the ones I thought were the most exciting. I just really loved that. And so as soon as I was kind of old enough, I started to go out and do that kind of thing with these kind of people on the streets. So I did it in Chester, where we would go for a couple of weeks in the summer and we would go talk to people from all around the world about Christianity. And they were on holiday, so they had time to chat, and they were quite cool with chatting, and we'd do it on the streets and in the cathedral, all around. And it was there that I kind of first encountered some amazing stuff about, global situations. Like there were people I was talking to where it would be illegal to talk about Christianity in their countries. And so the only way they were ever going to hear about it was from someone in another country, or someone who's very brave in their own country. All the way to people from Spain and Italy who just, like, on the whole, massively uninterested in talking about faith kind of stuff, to some people who'd literally never heard about Jesus ever before. And I just absolutely loved it. And it's been a bit of a love affair for me that's not gone away. It's something that I really, really care about. It's kind of part of my DNA now. So that's been my kind of story with this stuff. How has it been for you, Andy?
Yeah, it's good. I think, I mean, I guess a similar story to you in some ways, that I grew up going to church, and there's a sense of, a lot of us, a lot of people, you get to a point where you kind of inherit faith from parents or guardians or whoever brings you up. But there comes a point when you have to choose for yourself, that actually, is this something I'm going to carry on with or not? I guess if you're, a football fan, there probably comes a point where you have to decide, am I going to still support the same team that my dad did? And, are you going to commit the kind of, heresy of changing teams, which I know occasionally happens with people, and they're cast out from their families. But yeah, no, so I grew up with that. But I think it was around age 16 that God became very real to me. It went from being the stories that you learn about at Sunday school, which was called Sunday school back in the day, to actually know, God's real. He loves me. He wants a relationship with me. He's involved in my life. Jesus died for me. And because that, it's suddenly, when I often describe it, going from head knowledge to heart knowledge, it was almost, or kind of going from, I don't know, black and white TV to color HD, maybe 4K. Suddenly things came alive. And it wasn't that I got told, you must go and share your faith, but it was like this thing just overflowed out of me. And I was so excited about what was going on. And this was over 20 years ago now, which ages me. But yeah, it just, I got excited, and that was what began to happen all those years ago.
Awesome. Okay, so that's quite different. So for me, it was kind of like I saw other people who did this thing where they told other people about Christianity, and I was like, oh, I want to do that. But for you, it was like a natural kind of overflow, like a natural enthusiasm. What did that actually look like?
What did it look like? So I think, this point at which I began to own faith for myself, that God's real. Some of us in my youth group, we began to start praying together and worshiping together. And I guess as I did that, I was just very aware there were lots of people that didn't have this relationship with God. People kind of wandering around, what's life about? What's the meaning of life? What am I here for? And it's not that as a Christian, and we know this, and many of you watching will know this, because if you're a Christian, it's not everything goes well when you come to faith, but suddenly there are answers to some of life's biggest questions, and actually there's a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, a sense of reason for existence, that even when things are horrendous, you fit into a bigger story. There's a story that we're living for that's bigger than ourselves. And I think you look around, you go, oh my goodness, people don't realize that God loves them. People don't realize they're loved. People don't realize there's a Father in heaven that cares about them. People don't know that actually there's a reason to be alive, and so I probably wouldn't have vocalized it in that way at the time. I don't think I would have been as clear as that, but there was just something that was going, this is too big not to tell people about. On a small level, we see it, don't we? We see it if somebody goes to an amazing restaurant. We see it if somebody sees a great show, or there's a film that we really enjoy, or a TV show. There's a documentary on Netflix that it kind of, you're like, oh my goodness, did you see the guys that camped out overnight on the wall of Yosemite's El Capitan? Did you see the guy trying to climb El Capitan without any ropes at all? And those kind of things, you get excited. I mean, those things that excite me, I'm giving too much away. But I begin to tell people about that. They don't go, oh, you've got to tell people about that documentary. It just, you're excited. And I think similarly, but on a bigger scale, that was what happened to me. Yeah.
And that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that one up, because it is one of the classic things they say, isn't it? Is kind of like, for people who are more scared about talking about faith. So for those of you who don't have faith, what it's like on the other side is most people in the church kind of feel like probably should tell people about this, but I kind of don't want to. And the classic thing people always say is like, well, if you love a film, you'll tell people about a film. And I think you've just reminded me of a film I do actually want to watch. So is that Solo you're talking about?
Yeah. That's right. Well, there's two. There's Solo, and there's the Breaking the Dawn Wall, or something like that. There's two of them. So there's one, the guy that climbs without ropes, and there's this guy that climbs with ropes but does a bit that's never been climbed before. I recommend both.
Awesome, cool. Right, I'll get onto that. But there we go, classic example. Something you love, tell your friends about it. You gotta go see this. And so they say, it's so easy to do that. Why can't you do it with faith? But I think we all know there is something else going on there, and that some people do find it kind of unacceptable to talk about faith. So there was a bit of research done last year around this, where this was in the States, but they kind of interviewed people of all different ages who were Christians and asked them basically, is it okay to tell other people about your faith, and how excited about that are you? And there was like a big change in the generations. So kind of like baby boomers and elders, they call them. So baby boomers and older would say, on the whole, yes, this is really important to do. It's something I'm very excited to do. And it gets down to Gen X, which is you and I. And do you think we're at the tail end of Gen X? Yeah, who are stereotypically hanging out in their bedrooms, listening to The Cure. That's us being cynical about everything. But still, like, there's a decrease, but we're still like, yeah, we should probably do this kind of thing. Then it hits millennials, which is the most derided generation in history, bless them, who is a big drop off. And I think it's half of them said it wouldn't be right to share your faith with someone else. Like, it would actually be, in some sense, like an immoral thing to do. And I've not primed you for this at all, but have you got any thoughts just off the bat as to why that is? Like, what's happened? What's been the culture shift that people now think it's actually not okay to talk about faith? Whereas our generation older would have been like, yeah, it's good to talk about faith, but I just haven't got the courage to do it.
Yeah. So for us, for many of us, it was nerves, but it didn't seem like a bad thing. So I was fascinated because you and I read we're a bit geeky and we read the same research and read the same books and those kind of things. And so I'd heard the trends, like I'd kind of heard this reading about stuff. And then we were doing Alpha, and each week we mention Alpha. And Alpha, if you're new to this stuff, is an opportunity to explore questions about life over a number of weeks, invited usually for a meal, although at the moment it's hard to do that. Watch a video or hear a talk and then talk about stuff. So it's kind of looking at some of the stuff that we do. And we do Alpha at our church most terms, and lots of fun. And I had a group of guys who were quite a bit younger than me. They were millennials or Gen Z, some of them. And we there's a question on the week which talks about something like, the title is why and how should I share my faith? And some of these guys are not Christians, so that's quite an interesting dynamic. But what was interesting was that even the ones who are Christian said something like, I wouldn't the one of the questions I think says, how would you like to be told about faith if you weren't a Christian? And they said, I wouldn't want to be told. I'd want to find out myself. And yet they would self-describe as followers of Jesus. And I was like, and it, as we went around, I was like, oh, okay, this is, and the reason for them was they wanted to self-discover. They wanted to find it out for themselves. And so I think there was a suspicion of authority. There was a suspicion of, we're all surrounded by fake news. I think that's had an impact. Wanting to kind of make sure you're trusting the sources for yourself. I think there's a suspicion of authority for many people. And I think there's a real suspicion around power as well. That we heard a lot in the last few weeks around power, and many of us are doing all kinds of reading in relation and listening in relation to other issues. But I think for me, it feels, and I'm not sure even that people would describe those things themselves. But as you listen, that seems to be some of the things that I am hearing people say. And reading about. Is that similar to your what you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's this thing of like, don't tell me what to think. Like, it's that kind of that sense of self being absolutely everything. So I have to choose everything myself. Got a little bit of consumerism thrown in there for the mix as well, which is why probably something like Alpha is doing so well as it is, because the whole format is ask your questions, discover this, take your time, all that kind of thing. And it's something we've had to do to position ourselves for this kind of new generation. Is like, everything we do, we are here for people who have questions, who have doubts, and people who are skeptical. So this is the other thing that's interesting is, as we've talked to people who have been exploring faith in that generation, one of the recurrent themes comes up time and time again. I'm not sure, and I still have lots of questions, and I don't know about this, and I don't know about that, and a lot of conversations I've had have been along the lines of assuring people that it's okay to not have all the answers and still go with this, and to be uncertain, and it's like that's okay. And also like people not knowing if they'll be welcome in like a church community if they're not sure or they're still exploring, and all this kind of uncertainty type stuff around it. And so like we keep pointing towards the end of Matthew's gospel, which is like the last time we hear from Jesus in Matthew's gospel, this kind of recount of Jesus' life. And he's leaving his disciples, who he's invested all his time in for the last 3 years. And he's given them like instructions what to do next, basically. And it says in the description that some worshipped and some doubted. So even those people who'd known Jesus for like 3 years, had walked around with him, had seen him die and had seen him and were looking at him alive again, still had like loads of questions, still weren't sure. And yet Jesus was still like, to those people who were doubting, I've got a job for you to do, get on with it type thing. So it's kind of like, I think for some reason, a lot of people I've talked to think they have to have like absolute certainty on this. And they kind of have to have all of the questions answered and all that kind of stuff. And I think, as you and I know, this is one of those things where your faith definitely grows, but then the number of questions kind of multiplies as you kind of learn more and discover and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's really insightful and to do with kind of the certainty. And I think just I know you'd say this, but if you kind of got questions around doubts or some questions that maybe Dave and I could try and give some responses to either this evening or over the coming weeks, do flag those up. Or if you've got some thoughts around discussing faith, do send in some comments, and it'd be great to respond to those. I think the thing that comes to mind when you're talking about the not sure is there was a Catholic writer called Charles Taylor whose book I understand is not read that much, but he's quoted quite a lot because it's the sort of book you could use to keep a door open. Be great as a doorstop, but actually to try and understand it. I bought one of his books for a sermon I had to do at church, right? And I thought, I'm going to kind of have this at the front. I'm going to try and understand it. It was about identity. Anyway, I couldn't understand a thing. So I read that. So I listened to the talk summarizing it and just quoted that. And I had to be really honest with the guys at church and say, look, I couldn't understand this book. So, but Charles Taylor writes about this, and he talks about the idea that in our culture today, where he talks about being cross-pressured. And so, if we'd have lived 500 years ago in England or in kind of Europe, basically we'd have been surrounded by people that believed the Christian faith. Whether they're committed or not, the assumption would have been that God existed, Jesus died, Jesus rose from the dead. You go to church to be forgiven. You kind of receive communion. There'd been a whole bunch of things that people just would have believed, and the issue would have been probably commitment or lack of commitment. But today, and actually in many places throughout the world, throughout history, that hasn't been the case. We constantly are rubbing up against people that believe in completely different things. We've got people who've got no faith. We've got people who've got faith from Asia. We've got people that have got, got people who are Muslims. We've got people that got kind of more New Age spirituality ideas. We've got people that put their hope in kind of political ideologies, or there's all kinds of ways in which we're encountering ideas that are very, very different from our own. And I think in my mind, it takes, if you're in any way reflective or thoughtful, then it's going to make you ask questions. Whether you're an atheist or a Christian, whether you're a Muslim or a Buddhist, when you encounter people who are sincere and loving and all those sorts of things, you're going to, who aren't stupid, it's going to make you ask questions. And I think that's right. I think we should ask questions. But I think the way that we're living, 500 years ago, we just wouldn't have had those questions in the same way, but in the West. But where we are now, we have those questions partly because of that, I think.
Yeah, completely. And actually, when you think about it in those terms, if you are, especially if you're in an actually multicultural area and you've got Muslims and Hindus and, different faiths and none all around, then it feels like throwing a match into the tinderbox to be like, my faith is right, your faith is wrong, which is implied when you do this whole thing of talking about faith. But I would actually say that my experience was when we were in Vicar Factory in Cambridge, we did a short course on Islam, and part of that was going to the Islamic Theological College and having a chat with those. And what I always found to be the case was the people who were most like, we need to be multicultural and sensitive to others and all that kind of thing, were like kind of always treading on eggshells and always being really careful and always like stifling any kind of real conversation. But people who are like a bit more secure in what they believed, like these people in the Muslim Theological College, we could have quite open, tough, dealing with difficult thing, quite debates, and come quite securely from our position of like, this is what we believe. We know that you believe this. What about this? What about, asking questions of each other? And there was no tension in that room at all. And actually I found it way easier to talk about my Christian faith to those Muslims than I did someone who was, I don't know how to put this, but kind of very concerned about multiculturalism and a Christian, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And I think there's within the West, and not just within the West, but I think there is this, this kind of background idea, isn't there, that all faiths are equal, all faiths essentially teach the same thing. And that idea kind of seeps into people's thinking, whereas actually an honest Christian and Muslim will say, well, actually, there are some fundamental differences in our faith that they can't be the same. Like we respect one another, but they're not the same. If you just look at the person of Jesus, they're very, very different. And so therefore, often people will use illustrations about, kind of, all paths are going up the same mountain towards God. They're just different paths.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a nice picture, and it sounds really humble. Everybody's just kind of making their own pathway up the mountain. But of course, the hidden assumption is the only way you know that is if you're sitting on top of the mountain. And so therefore, the person that claims that is actually claiming to be able to sit on top of the mountain and have more revelation, be able to see more clearly than any person of any faith in the world. And actually, so it sounds like humble, but actually it ends up being quite arrogant, really. It's like the elephant thing. The person kind of, all these blindfolded people, and one's feeling the side of the elephant, and they think it's this, and actually the only way you know it's an elephant is if you can see. And so they're effectively saying, well, you guys are all blind, but I can see the whole thing, and you guys just got little bits of the truth. And so, but people don't see it like that. And I think that's quite an interesting. You have to step back a bit to realize that.
Yeah, completely. And so then it starts to come to this other thing of like, what you actually need is a way of relating to people who have different beliefs to you that isn't destructive, that isn't harmful, isn't hurtful, isn't going to like pull communities apart, all that kind of thing. And it's what time? It's 24 minutes past. And this is the first Tim Keller reference. Get well soon. Is that
a record? Is that a record?
It is. I think it is. That's a record. We've done amazing. And he was saying, the contemporary culture says you just, we need a lot of tolerance and not to get in each other's way and all that kind of stuff. And basically, works through the logic of how that doesn't hack it. It says actually what you need is a faith belief which causes you to treat people who are unlike you with love and compassion. It says that's exactly what you get in Christianity. So actually what matters is how you relate to people of different faith. And people are just really scared if we start talking about this stuff, like World War III is going to kick off. But actually, my personal experience has been actually just have some really great, interesting conversations. And every now and again, someone is very grateful for what new things they've learned and what they've experienced.
Yeah. So I guess, sorry.
I encourage people again, if you are watching live, then do add your thoughts, comments, and questions below, whether that's on YouTube or Facebook. It helps to bring you in the conversation. We love that. And if you are not watching live, build a time machine, come back to Thursday night at 8:25 and pop your comments below.
Or set your alarm for next Thursday, and then you can watch us live next week, maybe.
That's more practical. Yeah,
because then we can answer the comments live rather than.
Yeah. Fair enough. Cool. So this is all based on Paul. Good evening, Paul. Thank you for your question. And what he was asking actually more directly is, does this current digital age, and especially the kind of pandemic that we're in, which has forced people to spend more time online, open up more possibilities to talk about this stuff? And if it does, how should we be doing that? Like, what are good ways to do that? So having kind of set the groundwork of, yes, it's okay to talk about faith. No, World War III isn't going to kick off. Do it in a way that is loving and respectful and builds other people up. So given all of that background, what are good ways to do it? I was wondering, Andy, have you seen anyone who is acing it right now or doing really good stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a whole bunch of different things going on there. So there's some obvious restrictions, or have been over the past few months, in that face-to-face contact has been really difficult, if not impossible, and illegal, and and unwise. Actually, could be quite uncaring to because you could be carrying a disease. So I think so several things I think I've seen. So firstly, an obvious one is just the practical caring of people, and I think sometimes people use that as an excuse for not speaking. They say, I'm just going to show it by my life. But actually, we do need to show it by our lives. So, we just need to make sure that our words match up with our lives. So I think some of that stuff, churches, food banks, I think, phone calls, I think those things have been showing that we really think this thing is real, and showing it practically, and not just as a way to get our foot in the door to say, here's a food parcel, and can we tell you about Jesus? But actually, we love you, and therefore we want to serve you in this way. And also, you may want to know the reason we're doing it, and you may not, and that's okay. So I think those things have been really important in this season. I think I've seen one of the most extravagant, kind of not crazy, but out there-ish things I've seen in the last little while was Pat Allerton down in London, Portobello priest, who was basically going out on the streets with his bike and a big loudspeaker, and he would play Amazing Grace at high volume, and then would pray the Lord's Prayer and invite the people in the streets to do that. And initially he was quite nervous about it, but he had a sense that this was the right thing to do. And he actually had an amazing response. And there were some fantastic stories of nurses in, kind of some of the hospitals in London, holding people's hands as they died, hearing Amazing Grace kind of being, played out. And because he didn't take it as an opportunity to preach, he said who he was. He said, look, I'm the vicar from Notting Hill, blah, blah, blah. Just a few minutes of your time. He literally played that one song that many people know. And then he prayed the Lord's Prayer and invited people to join if they wanted to. And I just think it was incredibly, it pushed the boundary. It took kind of the church, inverted commas, officially out onto the street and gave it a really good go. But it didn't push it in people's faces. He didn't go, right, and now I'm going to preach for 30 minutes to you. He just kind of opened that conversation and sought to kind of open that a bit. So I thought that was amazing. And then I guess the online things, really, the kind of the one-to-one conversations, the Facebook threads, the videos, the odd podcast between two vicars talking about life, and is there more to life than, those sort of things. So those are some of the things I've seen. I don't know, Dave, if they resonate or you've seen others or got others in mind.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that I think like one of the problems is we can still, even in like the social media world, or even especially in the social media world, get ghettos. So whoever is following you, whoever your friends are on Facebook, are the people that you can reach. And then say you're a church and you're running the church Facebook page, it's only, generally speaking, the people who are following your Facebook page who are going to see your stuff. And so it's kind of like, it's quite easy to be like preach to the choir type thing, like that kind of stuff can happen quite easily. And one of the really good stories I heard actually was of a small village church that obviously had to close along with all the others during lockdown. And so they were doing the same thing a lot of people are doing. They're going on Zoom and doing a little service on Zoom. And so they broadcast it into the local like community Facebook group. So not the church one, like the community Facebook group. And they've now got like 300 people in their community joining along with them on a Sunday morning, when previously they were getting like a dozen people. And it was because actually they left their little silo and they kind of brought their social media presence into another social media bubble type thing, which was the people they were trying to reach. And I thought that was really good, because it's kind of like sometimes you think, I'm on social media, job done, but actually who is it that you're reaching and where are you going to?
Do you know, that's amazing. That as somebody who is about to try and restart a church, pretty much, there was a small service of faithful people at the church I'm going to, but we want to try and start something modern and really seeking to engage the estate in a major way. That thought of doing that actually, I think I'm going to kind of have a think about how that might be possible, because I think you're right. You know, some churches, I think so many churches have gone online, which has been incredible, of all different traditions and styles, ones that you wouldn't necessarily expect at all. But there is a danger of putting it behind several clicks and up on your kind of own personal bit. And the idea of actually putting it out there and, you know, really quite intentionally, I think is really encouraging, you know, looking beyond your own bubble in quite a significant way.
And I know, like, you can go quite far with that in some respects. So I know of a guy who is essentially leading a church in the online gaming world. He's like a gamer, deeply involved in that, and people are kind of gathered together for like church within these online games that he runs, and he's got like thousands of people in his like church, and you know, whether you want to put quotes around church or not is the big debate. But I really loved a quote from, who was it? Michael Todd, heads up Transformation Church in the States. Really interesting guy, because he took over. It's so funny, like a small church in America, a small church is 300, which would be a big church over here. And it kind of grew really quickly to thousands because they made the decision to go online. And this was like 5 years ago, so before it was cool. And they grew through that. And one of his lines that's really struck with me is, a shepherd is with their sheep. And this is the whole kind of like metaphor of church leaders are like shepherds and they're people like sheep. And it's like, your sheep are on social media, so you know, go where your people are at. And that's like more than anything, that kind of convinced me about this whole digital world and how important it is. I was like, you know what, fair point, that is where people are at right now. And then we had I hope Sam doesn't mind me saying this, but we had a staff meeting, and one of the guys who works there, Sam, he's still kind of like, I think maybe on the fence about like Christianity. He's still exploring, still making the decision, but he thought it was absolutely fantastic and amazing that churches were going like I found that like really good, because he's like, that's where people are at. He kind of echoed that same kind of sentiment, which is, it's just classic what we're talking about your faith. You go to where the people are. You don't kind of expect them to come to you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you know, that's always a danger for us, as those of us who are Christians, is we, you know, it's easy to be around people who, or for many of us, we find it easy to be around people that think like us, or, you know, kind of enjoy similar things to us, you know, kind of whether that be a sport or a hobby or whatever. And the you know, the number of times you speak to people in churches who say, I actually don't have any friends who aren't Christians, or, you know, I don't have any friends that don't go to church, or have very few. And therefore, you know, they're actually looking around going, I'm not sure I've got anybody I can talk to about this, you know. And it's not, again, that's not the only reason you'll have friends who aren't Christians, but of course it's not. But actually, if only everybody you ever know and everybody you ever interact with is a churchgoer and loves Jesus, then yes, you can talk about Jesus, but actually it's not doing that sharing of faith stuff with people outside, is it?
No, totally. Let's do a little workshop here, Andy. So this is Paul helps with the St. Luke's social media presence and the website and all that kind of stuff. So Paul, I tried putting a service trailer out on Crosby Community Facebook group, got 900 views, but didn't relate to any increase for online views on a Sunday service. Okay, so let's workshop this, Andy. What's going on here?
What's going on? Well, I mean, you know Crosby far better than me. I think that's really, I suppose it'd be interesting to know. And again, I don't. So the first thing is, what would be interesting to know would be, was that mainly the Christians in Crosby who saw it? Which is always a danger, isn't it? You know, we put out, so we do lots of Alpha adverts in Derby, and you see you see many of the likes. You know, oh yeah, I know 25 of those people. You know, it's kind of all the Christians from church, and we can do that really easily. I think so again, and I often talk about Alpha because it's part of the world that I'm part of. But Nikki Gumbel, who started Alpha, says, you know, all the kind of advertising, all of the posters and the adverts and those sorts of things are great, but actually not many people come to church or come to Alpha off the back of an Alpha, you know, something that they just see. But what it does do is it gets people aware of that. And I wonder whether there's something similar about church, that actually those Possibly, and again, it's kind of speculating, but for some of those people, it could be, oh, I didn't know that St. Luke's was still there. I didn't know what St. Luke's looked like. I didn't know what it was doing. Translating into actually coming online and watching a service is a quite a big jump. It's not as big a jump as coming through the door, but I wonder whether there is a cumulative effect. And actually, the big things is obviously the personal invite. That's what really makes a difference on Alpha. You interview Alpha, but kind of you ask guests at the end, why did you come on Alpha? And almost all of them say, so and so invited me, or so and so came with me. And I know at Theological College, not our one, but one of them. They used to get ordinands. They say, right, go down to the local betting shop and place a bet. And because of the sort of people that train to be Church of England vicars, they would go in there and not have a clue what they were doing. They'd be like, what do I do? And I think for a lot of people, churches like that, like they just haven't got a clue. They don't, they've got a vague idea of what we do. We probably sing a few songs, but they might be kind of modern hymns. They might be weird, happy, clappy things with a tambourine. But actually, I think a lot of people just don't know. And so that distance between, I don't go to church. I've never been to church. I wouldn't even consider going to church. And even turning up on a kind of Sunday online is a big jump. Yeah. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, totally. It's what we're experiencing is there's a lot more going on than even the metrics would say. So like when you look at number of views and stuff like that, quite often I think it's designed to flatter you a bit because they include everything that was like from 1 second up. And so like Facebook makes you feel like you're doing amazing. So I'm quite used to, because I used to work in web design, digging in and seeing what the real numbers are. And, the real numbers are, good, not like amazing. Like it's not mega church America territory. But what's interesting is for the number of people who are actually viewing on Sunday, I seem to be having more conversations with a broader number of people about church that have seen something or heard about something than seem to even be watching on a Sunday. And I think it is that thing, it's related to this idea that you have to see a message 7 times before you've really heard it and take action on it, all that kind of thing. And actually, my instinct when seeing that, Paul, was actually like really well done, because that is increasing the visibility of like the church in the community. People know it's alive and not dead. It's not this thing that's just closed down right now. And it has just, it's raised awareness, which is really hard to measure, but it does make a difference. And and then ultimately the thing that tends to get it over the line is that personal relationship But the other thing that's really interesting from online, and this came from Michael Todd as well, he said like that his most effective message that he's ever preached didn't take off until 2 years after it went online. So he one Sunday preached this message, and he said, on YouTube, his mum and a few friends kind of watched it. 2 years later, it went viral. And so he's like, when you do stuff online now for people, you don't know when it is that person's going to need it and see it. And it could be literally years down the line.
It's a scary thought, Dave, isn't it? When you're putting stuff out, that stuff out online.
I like not to think about it too much.
but I think it is interesting that level of, kind of from that initial contact to actually doing something. So the thing that really hit me was a few months ago, before lockdown, probably end of last year. And in my gym, there was, they do personal training, which I've never done. But they were doing a kind of a like taster personal training where you'd have a small group of people, so it costs less, which for vicars is a great thing. And you have to contact a person. And I saw these adverts for it, like every time I went in, I was seeing it. I thought, And then I messaged the personal trainers, and they came back to me and were saying, what about times? I was trying to work out times, and and actually, I've never actually been, like, we never got it sorted. But I saw the things. It took me ages to actually even then message because there was 2 of them. Then they got back to me. Then I tried to work out times, went backwards and forwards. And one of the reasons was that one of the personal trainers came back and said, well, I don't want to hassle you, just make your own mind up. And it reminded me of inviting people to church, where we keep inviting, but we also say, we don't want to hassle you. We want to give you space. But that kind of jump into doing that. And the thing that would have actually made me do it ultimately would have been if a friend of mine had gone, I'm doing that session, why don't you come with me? And I'd have gone, yeah, of course. And it was just like, oh, this is what church is like. That was kind of, it just really hit me. Yeah,
completely. And this relates really well to the question that Rach has asked, which is really good. On social media, what do you think is a good balance between all the God stuff and all the regular stuff? So this is something that I do find myself trying to balance all the time. And I know, like, when the pandemic hit and things got very serious, like the amount of like God stuff on our social media channels and stuff went through the roof. And it was largely because, like, whilst we were still open, but like we only had a few days left, just like had a moment where I was like, it's just really important to talk about like why we have hope as a people and why we're not going to get destroyed by this, and talking about that. And then like the next day, someone from a local shop who works there came in and said, thank you so much for that video. Made me feel really peaceful. I showed it to my husband and it just really helped us to sleep that night. And that was actually me being like the most God stuff Christian I'd ever been on any of our stuff. And I was like, oh, and it helped people. And they weren't weirded out by it, and it wasn't strange. And I think it was a bit because the atmosphere changed, and people needed to hear a bit of hope and needed to know it was going to be all right. And we're just like a little bit more open. And we've kind of, as you can see, we've kept on in that vein. We kept talking about this stuff because people seem to be not as freaked out as you think they would be. And that's generally been my experience, is like, however far you think you can go and be socially acceptable, it's usually like 1 or 2 bits more than that and it's still okay. I don't know if that's how you experience it.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting question, isn't there, around how people use social media. So different people seem to use it in different ways. I don't know if some of my friends seem to be continual campaigners. Their whole news feed is campaigning about this issue or that issue. There are some people who would never mention anything even vaguely controversial. It's pictures. I mean, it's the old kind of joke about the pictures of their dinner on Instagram, but it is that kind of stuff. And at different points, and I think a lot of us just don't really know how we use it. Like we kind of, we have this way, that way. And I think for me personally, and again, I think it does, depends what you want to use your social media account for. So I've got, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and I use them in different ways. That's the other thing. Different mediums lend themselves to different things. So I think you probably want to think about how you want to use it. Some vicars, it's all about their church. It's all about the stuff they do. There's not really very much personal stuff on it. Other vicars, you might not even know they are a vicar. And people of faith, I think, are in between. I think if you're a Christian and there's people wouldn't know that you follow Jesus at all, I think I'd want to ask questions, because it should reflect the reality of your life. I think I probably would want to say we need to take God really seriously, but take ourselves less seriously, and that's always a challenge for me. I think, whether it be online or in real life. Just because I probably sometimes take God not as seriously as I should, and probably take myself too seriously and worry too much about what others would think of me. So I think there's definitely I don't think there's a right answer to that question. I think it's all about how you choose to use your social media channels. But I do think on probably a person's regular, a person's regular Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, I would probably want to interspace, stuff just to do in my normal life. Because yes, I'm a vicar. Yes, I'm a Christian. Yes, I follow Jesus. Yes, that is central to who I am. But there are other things in my life. Yes, God encompasses all of those things. But there's watching sport. There's going for a walk in the countryside. There's things with my kids, and I believe God comes into those. But I would want to share those things, because people are. If I used to work in the workplace, every conversation I had was not about Jesus. It was about, what about this piece of work? Where are we going out for drinks tonight? What are you up to this weekend? Now, God would come into those conversations, sometimes by my doing, but usually with people asking me, interestingly. So I'm not sure there's a right answer, and it's a good question, but I think each person probably has to work that out for themselves. Would you agree?
Yeah, totally. And I think actually what really matters at the moment is that, that authenticity word again. Like people can smell a fake. And I think like whatever you post online has to come out of who you are quite naturally. So like we're doing this because we genuinely love chatting like this, and we probably don't get enough time. So by like making this like a formal thing, we get to enjoy ourselves and chat this stuff through. And I think like one person I know who does this like really well is John Tyson. He heads up a church in New York, and his Instagram feed's brilliant because it's like a combination of like, here's a great book about God that you'd really love. Here's a bit of jazz music. Here's my photography of New York. Here's a bit of a news feed thing from New York. And it's kind of like he mixes it all up, and it's all, it's so unique, but it's so uniquely him. And you know, it's not fake. You know, he like genuinely loves jazz. He genuinely loves photography, and poetry and all that kind of stuff, as well as talking about God. And it's just like, it's quite a delight to follow his Instagram feed and see kind of what's going to come out next. But like, you know, if someone tried to just copy that and just put up, you know, a bit of poetry or photography every day, and it wouldn't, you know, exactly work type thing. So I think there's a bit about that as well, just like actually, you know, being your natural self.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you're right. People can smell fakes, can't they? And you know, I mean, there's jokes, aren't there, about the fact that, you know, social media being people's highlights reels, and they are, you know, we're not going to put up stuff that's negative most of the time, although there are some people that seem to use their Facebook post, you know, their Facebook post as a kind of a kind of a dear diary almost, and it is all negative. But generally, I think we just have to we have to be open and honest, and if that's the way you're going to use that, you know, to kind of represent yourself, then, you know, different parts of your life will come in, because we're not one-dimensional creatures, are we?
No, yeah, not at all. It should all come in. It's always like one of my greatest compliments people give me is like, oh, you talk about God, but it's not like in a weird way. It's like down to earth. And I'm like, oh, I love that, because it's like kind of my like goal in life is like to show that, you know, God is not this weird abstract thing that you have to talk about in weird ways, and you know, but it is actually part of everyday life, and it's accessible to everyone. And you know, faith is not for weird people, or maybe just not weird, maybe all weird. Okay, so Andy, any final thoughts on this whole thing about, is it okay to talk about faith and how we do it today?
Yes, it's okay to talk about faith. I think what you said about actually people are more ready to hear usually than we are to speak. I think if you've got an ounce of emotional intelligence, you will usually pick up when, you know, is wise and when it's not. I think getting people to ask the questions, and you responding to those is practically very, very helpful. So you know, then you know you're not imposing on people, but actually there's a genuine interest. And I think as people get to know you, that will come up. I think practically not feeling that we have to kind of present everything that Jesus ever said and the whole story of the, you know, kind of the scriptures from creation to new creation, you know, the 5 models of atonement or whatever in one go. I think, you know, Jesus often didn't give, you look at the kind of, when Jesus told things, he'd tell a quick story and then he would explain it in short. And you're left sometimes going, I don't get that, you know, and it leaves people wanting more. I think, and I think trusting, you know, if we're a follower of Jesus, we believe the Holy Spirit's at work in God's world and that he is at work behind the scenes. And I think Alpha is often works like that. So people will leave on a week, you think, oh my goodness, you know, what on earth are they thinking? You know, or they're never going to come back next week. You know, they just think this thing's a whole load of rubbish. And then suddenly the next week they turn up and, you know, they're praying and you're like, what? You know, where's this gone? So I think we have to remember that God is at work in his world. This is not just us trying to muster up conversations. God wants to draw people to himself. He loves them. He's passionate about them. He knows them better than we know ourselves, you know, than they know themselves. They're we believe they're made for a relationship with him. And so we're working with him to encourage people to him. And I think we have to trust he is at work in his world, would be the final thing I would want to say, I think.
Awesome. Yeah. I really liked, there was a line from Tom Wright when he was talking about this stuff, and he said he's very impressed with people who have just one evangelistic pickup line, but he doesn't know if he could do that. Kind of saying like everyone's really unique, and you know, God has something very unique to say to each person for where they are at right now, and they don't have to download everything, but just deal with that kind of like next step. That's like, yeah, that is so true. So we are going to be back here again next week to talk about whatever you want to talk about. So if you've got a question you'd like us to discuss, you can pop it in the comments if you're reading this, or you can go to the Storyhouse Facebook page or website and fill out the contact form and send us a question that way if you want to. But we'd love to answer the questions, especially if you're just curious or skeptical about faith and you've got a question about what it all means. You'd love us to discuss, and we can pick it up for you next week. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you again next week.